Can China really hurt the U.S. with its financial weapons in the U.S.-China trade war? Is the U.S. in a, quote, fantastic position, as U.S. President Donald Trump says? Is dumping U.S. Treasury bonds really an option for the Chinese? And how does all of this impact the 2020 election? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Today we sit down with Heritage Foundation economist Stephen Moore, who played a major role in the development of President Trump's economic policy, and is co-author of the book Trumponomics: Inside the America First Plan to Revive Our Economy. Steve Moore, wonderful to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Pleasure.
So, these Chinese retaliatory tariffs have gone into effect on Monday, and actually President Trump has been tweeting about it, and I thought maybe you can give us a little bit of a breakdown. I'll read a little bit of what we got this morning. First tweet, he said, China buys much less from us than we buy from them by almost $500 billion, so we are in a fantastic position. And then he says, we are the piggy bank that everyone wants to raid and take advantage of, no more. And the second piece is China will be pumping money into their system and probably reducing interest rates in order to make up for the business that they're losing. If the Federal Reserve ever did a match, it would be game over, we win. So Steve, tell us what you think of all this.
There's a lot there.
Yes.
So let's start with the first part of
Yeah.
it, which is, how this whole trade war, and it looks like it's becoming a trade war, began. And I know this whole story because I've been in touch with my friends over at the White House who have been doing the negotiating.
Right.
And the story hasn't really been told in the media, which is that Trump and President Xi essentially had kind of a handshake deal about what this agreement was going to look like. They've been working for a year and a half on it. And then about 10 or 12 days ago, the Chinese just backed off on it.
Right.
And they just said, well, we're not going to go for that. And Trump was infuriated, and rightfully so. They've been doing all this negotiation. You get down to the 1-inch yard line, and then you can't get it over.
Right.
It's like, if you and I have a handshake deal, and at the last, oh, one more thing, I want this or that. You can't negotiate on those terms. So China is clearly the power that actually initiated this trade conflict. Trump will not back down, and Trump basically said, look, if we have a deal, you're going back on it. I believe we're in a very abusive relationship with China right now. Trump is right. We've opened up our markets to them for 25 years. They still, 25 years later, haven't opened up their markets to us. I'm a free trade guy. I hate tariffs. I love free trade. But it's hard to have free trade, frankly, with a country that is stealing, cheating, lying, involved in cyber espionage against the United States, hacking into our computer systems. They are an increasingly menacing power that is problematic for the United States, to say the least. And their behavior is going to have to change. Now, my opinion is that and by the way, Trump has sort of told me this. Let's say we have this tit for tat. We're going to have tariffs on you for this amount. Well, we're going to do that. As Trump would say, sooner or later they run out of ammunition, right? Because they don't buy that much from us. We buy $600 billion a year from them.
Right.
And so I do think China's playing a dangerous game here. It's going to hurt both of our countries, if we have a trade war. We're already seeing in the stock market the effect of this. Consumers will pay it.
Right.
But I do think Trump is using leverage, and I think at the end of the day, I'm actually fairly confident that Trump is going to get a victory here. The question is, how long is this going to take?
Right. So, are we in a fantastic position just because of this trade deficit?
We're in a very solid position. The way I like to put it, and again, Trump has said this kind of thing too. If we can't trade with China, we sneeze. If they can't trade with us, they catch pneumonia. They have much more to lose than we do. If we can't trade with China, when you go to Walmart, you may have to pay 20 cents more for a tube of toothpaste, or the clothing you buy is going to be a little more expensive, and that will hurt consumers, no question about it. That's one of the benefits of free trade. You get cheap things. But if they can't trade with us, if they can't sell us their stuff, this cripples their economy.
Right.
So, and Trump understands this. Look, one thing you have to understand about Donald Trump, because I've been around him now for 4 years, he understands what makes him such a great negotiator. He understands the concept of leverage.
Right.
And he understands right now, at this point in time, we have tremendous leverage over China. That might not be the case 5 or 10 years from now, but right now we have the leverage and he's using it.
What do you make of this? I noticed that it's mostly agricultural things that are basically being targeted by the Chinese tariffs, but there's also liquefied natural gas. I don't
Yeah,
even understand
I'm
why
not
they would
sure
do that.
why, but
yeah.
I have I think there's an interesting point that's not been made in the media about what China is doing.
Okay.
We've had a conversation in this country for 2.5 years now about Russia meddling
Yes.
in American elections.
Yes, we
right?
have.
And everybody's outraged, and rightfully so. We don't want foreign powers meddling in our elections. What about China? I mean, this is a clear-cut case where they're trying to meddle into our election by using tariffs as a election to go after Trump voters.
Yeah.
We can't stand for that.
Yeah.
Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, we can't have foreign powers trying to influence the outcome of our elections. And by the way, Russia denied that they were influencing our elections. China's doing it openly, brazenly.
Right.
I mean, so we can't stand for that.
Right. It's almost like they're using the tariffs as sanctions of sorts, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And really pinpointing those hard hat, blue collar, and agricultural Trump voters. And that's just, I don't think that's ever really happened before in our history where a country has so brazenly tried to use trade tactics to influence an election. It's pretty clear they don't want Donald Trump reelected, right? I mean, Donald Trump is a very hardline guy with China. They would love to have a Joe Biden or a Bernie Sanders or someone like that in the White House. And one of the things that actually makes me nervous, and I think does weaken Trump's hand a little bit, is China may believe, Beijing may believe, we can just wait this guy out.
Right.
We can hurt the U.S. economy, hurt the U.S. stock market. Then we get a more pacifist Democrat in office that we can deal with, and that I think is the one flaw in Trump's strategy. Is we just don't know what their pain threshold is in China,
Right.
Because they are patient people, the Chinese.
Right, and they also don't have to go
Elections.
through.
Exactly. We
Yeah.
have democratic elections. They don't.
Right.
By the way, I believe that's an advantage that we have. But for President Xi, he doesn't care if a couple million Chinese are thrown out of work or something like that because he doesn't have to face those voters.
So what about the second part? China will be pumping money into their system, probably reducing interest rates. Do you expect this?
I love Donald Trump, and I think he's been pretty right on the Fed. I think one of the reasons he nominated me for the Fed was that I agree with him that the Fed has been too tight, and I worry that we have actually had declining prices, and that is suppressing the natural growth of the economy.
Right.
We've shifted the supply of goods and services out through our tax cuts and our deregulation, and when economy produces more goods and services, that means prices fall. Now,
Right.
the 300 PhD economists over there at the Fed, they don't believe that. They think just the opposite, but they're wrong. And so, but in terms of Trump saying, well, somehow we can just switch the dial on interest rates and negate the impact of this trade war, I don't agree with that.
Okay, and so.
By the way, China can't protect their economy by influencing their currency either. All they do, when you weaken your currency, all you're doing is basically hurting your own people, right? Because it means the currency, who owns the Chinese currency? The Chinese people do. So it would be like saying, if the dollar bill in my pocket is now worth 90 cents and your dollar bill is worth 90 cents, are we better off? Of course not.
So China has been, you said 25 years has been engaged in what we could call some kind of economic aggression.
Yes.
or something
Not
of this
just,
realm.
and increasingly a militaristic. They've become much more of a centrally planned totalitarian government. I don't buy this idea China's going to take over the world and they're going to be the #1 people in artificial intelligence and robotics and 3D imaging and the new bioengineering. I'm going to put my money on American entrepreneurs, people in Silicon Valley and
Right.
Austin, Texas. And when you have government directing your investment through a centrally planned economy, a Soviet-style system, show me any time where that's really worked. So, I love our way of doing it, a more free market system. So I don't buy this idea China's going to overtake the world. There's China 2025 program
Yes.
where they think, we're going
Yes.
to be #1 in robotics and artificial intelligence and all the engineering. We'll see about that, but the last 30 years, almost every important invention and innovation has been made in America, and China has copycatted that. And by the way, this is a big problem with China.
Yep.
They copycat everything we do, which is fine, but you got to pay for it, right?
Right.
You got to pay for it,
Absolutely.
and they don't pay for it.
Absolutely. Well, their strategy.
That's called the theft of intellectual property, and it's a big problem.
So exactly. So their strategy, they couldn't innovate seemingly, but they said, okay, well, we'll just steal it.
Yep.
Right.
And you
the
know,
effect is the same. We have the technology.
why is that? So some people are probably wondering, why is that such a big problem for America? It's because increasingly what we do as Americans is intellectual property. You know, computer software, you know, innovation and product designs, copyrights, patents,
Yeah.
new drugs, new vaccines. All of that stuff is intellectual property. It's the stuff that, you know, comes from the human mind. If they don't pay for it, not only does that hurt American, you know, companies, but also reduces innovation. Because if people aren't going to pay for it, why would you invent it in the first place? So it's a big problem. Trump is spot on this. They're stealing, by our estimates, $300 billion, not 300 million, $300 billion a year from our companies.
Right. No, and I heard that's even a low estimate by some
Yeah,
people.
we don't know exactly.
Right.
By the way,
right.
another problem, you know, I talked to our negotiators. China still denies they're doing it. I mean,
so
you
let's
know,
say
if,
China.
if, you know, the first step in overcoming a problem, you have to admit you have a problem. They won't even admit it.
Well, so this is the thing that's been troubling me. Like, let's say China does blink. Let's say China, you know, signs a deal that's better for America than what's been the last 25 years.
And I think in the end of the day, that will happen.
And but how can we ever trust them to live up to that bargain? That's
Well,
the question I have.
And
I'm
Donald
talking
Trump-
about the Chinese Communist
Of course,
Party here,
of
right?
course.
Yeah.
So the answer to that is you can't trust them. You can't trust them as far as you can spit. I mean, it's just true. You know, we had a deal with them one day, and the next day they don't have those kind of Western values. You and I shake hands. You know,
Okay, let's do
we have
it.
a deal. You know, but they don't believe in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what has Trump done?
Yeah.
Trump knows that, by the way. So what he wants, and this has been the hang-up in the negotiations, he wants enforcement. He wants what Reagan called trust but verify.
Yes.
You know, you're going to meet these metrics because we don't trust you based on your past behavior, and you're going to do X and Y and Z. And if you don't do X, Y, and Z by such and such a date, we're going to hammer you with these tariffs. Again, I don't like tariffs. I hate tariffs, but it's the billy club we're using to get them to behave.
You mentioned that this may take a bit of time. And you also mentioned that you think they will make a deal. What do you have any sense of
I think
any projection
my best
here?
bet.
Yeah.
You know, and this is speculation, but look, it's in both countries' interest to get this done. You know, it really is. And by the way, nothing that Donald Trump is asking for from the Chinese is unreasonable, right? Nothing.
Right.
I mean, everything
Well,
that they should be doing. Yes, they should stop stealing. Yes, they should open up their markets. Yes, they should, you know, buy more of our products. And so my bet is that before the end of this year, so, you know, in the next 5 or 6 months, we get a deal. It's not going to be a great deal, you know, because China only goes so far, but it'll improve things. And I think Trump kind of can declare victory, get reelected, because that will be a spark for the economy. And if the economy is remaining strong like it is now, Trump's going to win a big reelection. And then, you know, my advice to Trump is then you use your second term to really hammer them, because this isn't going to be over in 6 months. I mean, you know, it's
Right.
going to go on for years and years and years. This is the epic battle. This is the new Cold War, in my opinion.
So, you know, Xi, the Chinese dictator, he's been in a position where up until now, there's been kind of unrestricted ability to take intellectual property, basically no responses to these things. This economic aggression has been going on. All of a sudden, hey, we got to put the brakes on this.
This is the new
right?
sheriff
This
in
is
town.
what this is the new sheriff in
Yeah.
town. So, you know, purely based on that, you know, Xi, I imagine, is experiencing all sorts of resistance internally among his Politburo and so forth, because, well, why should we? Hey, it's been a free-for-all for so long, right? This is
Yeah,
the-
I mean, look, I don't know how their government operates. I
Yeah.
don't know how the decision making is done
Yeah.
there. But I know this, you know, they're going to either have to start behaving. Look, when we started this relationship, you know, back in the early 80s with China, they were still a third world country, you know, and we wanted to nurture them along. We opened up the
Yeah.
markets to them, and that's how
Absolutely.
they grew. Now we're 25 years later, and they still haven't opened up their markets to us. And, you know, Americans, by the way, I would make the case that the China issue was one of the #1 issues for Trump. You know, he was the first presidential candidate. The Bushes weren't tough on China. Clinton wasn't tough on China. Obama wasn't tough on
Yeah.
China. You know, he's the first president who's basically said, we have a problem here. And you know what? The American people get it. You know, people here in Washington, D.C. may not get it, but I guarantee you go to Erie, Pennsylvania, you go to Rockford, Illinois, you go to Flint, Michigan, those people understand, you know, what's going on with respect to these China trade abuses.
So you mentioned that, you know, American consumers obviously will feel something because of this. You know, what do you think the overall effect on the U.S. economy is going to be? Let's say this thing goes on
It'll be
for
negative,
years.
and it'll hurt Trump. And again, China will be hit 3 or 4 times harder than we will, but it's a mutually assured destruction strategy. And so, I think the American people, though, are up for this. I think most people are sophisticated in understanding what's at stake here. I mean, by the way, the worst possible outcome would be for Trump to stand down, right? Because that would only further embolden
Right.
China to abuse us.
Right.
And I think some of my free trade friends, and look, I am a free trader, let me say that loud
Yeah.
and clear,
Yeah.
but I think they don't get that,
Right.
that yeah, we got to have free trade, but it's hard to have a free trade regime. And by the way, the political consensus for free trade breaks down if you've got a country that's involved in such abusive behavior. So, that's why I wrote this, piece a few weeks ago, basically saying, that even free traders should get behind Trump in this, because it's in the end of the day, if Trump prevails, we will have freer trade.
Right.
We'll reduce our tariffs, they'll reduce our tariffs, and both countries will actually be better off.
So we discussed the impact on the American farmers and how that's a very targeted strategy on the Chinese side. There's been people kind of mocking the president's idea of subsidizing some of these farmers to basically make it through the challenge that's being faced on them. What do you make of the subsidy concept?
I'm a little torn by it, frankly.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, they are targeting our farmers. So we have to protect our farmers. And in normal circumstances, I don't ever think the government should ever protect one into the steel industry or this industry or that car industry.
Yeah, yeah.
But in this case, it's a foreign act of aggression here. And why not? Trump's idea actually kind of makes sense. We're going to collect $15 billion of tariffs from them. Guess what? We're going to give that $15 billion from the Chinese to help our farmers to make sure that they don't fall victim to this Chinese aggression. And I think I could back it. I'm not entirely comfortable with it, but we can't allow our farmers to go bankrupt because China is targeting them.
So there's a Chinese newspaper, state newspaper, of course, suggesting that the Chinese government could dump U.S. Treasury holdings. And
That's
as
the
a
biggest
retaliation
joke.
tragedy.
That's the most
Well, tell me
ridiculous argument. China would only be hurting themselves if they do that. They own $1 trillion of our bonds. All they're doing is cheapening the bonds that they hold. By the way, there's no shortage in the world of people who want to buy U.S. Treasury bills. Have you noticed the interest rates on Treasury bills today?
Right.
So come on, that's the stupidest argument I've ever heard. I hear a lot of Americans saying that, oh, we're vulnerable to China. No, it's the fact that, why do you think they own Treasury bills? Because they know it's the safest investment in the world. It's almost, it's almost flattering to the United States that they own so much of our debt. And so the idea that somehow they're going to cripple our economy by selling the bonds they've already bought is ridiculous. And they've actually been buying fewer bonds, and there hasn't been a shortage of people scooping them up.
So this massive holding, $1 trillion holding, that you're saying that there's no threat to America from that?
Zero.
Fascinating.
Now, I would love to see us have a lower debt, right? But it doesn't matter who holds the debt.
Well, actually, you were talking.
By the way, there's let's say you've got, 25 really rich capitalists in China who own, $300 billion of our debt. Why don't we just let them immigrate to the United States, become American citizens, and guess what? China doesn't own the debt anymore. How do you like that idea?
Well, so I remember you talking about debt to GDP ratio being kind of the critical figure that matters, and maybe you can just break down how does that differ, U.S. to China? And
I don't know what their debt. Well, they don't have nearly as much debt as we do because they have very high savings rates, and we would be better off as a country if we saved more as a nation.
Right.
Look, I love our situation right now. I mean, my goodness, think about this. We've cut taxes. We've reduced regulation. We've got a pro-business president. We've got, conservative pro-business people on the courts. We have so massively increased the American capacity to produce output of goods and services. I mean, my goodness, we have, according to the latest jobs report, something like 7.3 million more jobs than people that are filling them. And even if you took every one of the 6 million unemployed people who are officially unemployed, that means if we put every one of those people in a job, we still have 1.5 million jobs left over. We've got a booming economy right now. And this is the last piece of the puzzle, in my opinion. Getting this China trade deal done in a way that America can stand proud, where China buys more of our products, and we have a more level playing field. in terms of our trade relationship.
Well, let's talk about the economy a little more broadly. You wrote the book Trumponomics, of course, right? And you were one of the architects, or
Yep.
part architect,
Yep.
certainly, of the president's economic policy. What do you think the growth projection is for this year?
Well, it
really?
depends a lot on this China, and it's hard for me to say because I think a trade war with China could knock a percentage point off the GDP number. So this is a big deal. But I think we're on a good, solid 3% growth path, and if we settle this trade deal, I think we could get to 3.5 to 4. Now, whenever I'd be with President or then candidate Trump, you would always say, we think we can get you to 3.5, 4%. He said, I want 5. I want 5% growth. Trump is such an optimist.
Right.
I don't know if we can get to 5, but gee, 3.5, 4%. Remember, in 8 years in office, not once in 8 years did Barack Obama to get us to 3%. And in
Right.
Trump's second year in office, he got us to 3%. And by the way, during the campaign, Larry Summers and Paul Krugman and the New York Times editorial board and all these people, they said, Trump is lying to the American people. It's impossible to get to 3%
Right.
growth. And here we are right now with 3% growth. So those people, by the way, those are the same people who said Trump is going to cause a second Great Depression.
Right.
They're having a hard time explaining how the economy is doing so well when everything they said, they were against the tax cuts, they were against the deregulation, they were against America, pulling out of the idiotic, Paris Climate Accord. All of these things, it's not one thing that Trump has done. That's the thing I like to tell people. People say, what's the most important thing Trump has done? Well, I love the tax cut. I think it's been really important for our investment, but it's just putting a pro-business, pro-America guy in the White House.
Right.
It makes a big difference when you replace a community organizer with someone who knows how to run a business.
Yeah, I remember just being stunned at the Small Business Optimism Index. Just like kind of, yeah, exactly.
Through the roof. And it's
Yeah.
stayed high for 2.5 years now. We've never seen anything in the history of the polling of that. It was literally 48 hours after the election. That number just went straight up. I think I saw a number just the other day, around 80% of small businesses, and we have 26 million small businesses.
Right.
They're the kind of spinal cord of our economy.
Yeah.
80% of them are optimistic.
Yeah. And this was just purely perception.
It's
basically, it was right after
confidence.
the
It's
election, right?
confidence.
Exactly.
It's a big deal if you own a business. Remember what what Obama said. You didn't build that. That's just an insult to people who start great businesses,
Right.
whether they're corner grocery store or, IBM. And that kind of displays an attitude about business in the Obama administration, which was hostile. They were hostile to business.
Right.
Trump loves business,
Clearly.
And by the way, you can't be pro-worker and anti-business. You have to be pro-business and pro-worker, and Trump is pro-worker and pro-business. And so I think it's that emphasis on putting America first in every decision that he makes that has unleashed. It's like taking a champagne bottle and shaking it up and taking that cork off.
So for you, is this China question sort of the biggest issue related to the economy in your mind? Is there something else
Yeah.
that keeps you awake at night?
Right now it's China, clearly. I do worry a little bit about the Fed. I think they're a little too tight. But, I think Trump, although I think his point is well taken, I think he exaggerates, how important the Fed is. I also worry about the global economy. It's slowed
Right.
down.
Right.
So that means, what's happening now is the United States is kind of carrying the rest of the world on our shoulders, and that gets heavy after a while, and that slows
Right.
you down. We want Japan to grow faster, we want Europe to grow faster, we want Canada to grow faster, because then they can buy, prosperity isn't a zero-sum game. Right, so I do worry a little bit about the slowdown. Japan's growing at only 1%. Europe's kind of flatlined. China's growth rate is falling. Trump is right. We are the envy of the world right now in terms of our economy. Everybody's looking at how are we doing it. What's happening here? That's why you're seeing a Trump effect politically around the world now. A kind of populist, pro-worker, pro-business, capitalist, free market capitalist crusade, which is a wonderful thing, because this is the issue of our time. It's socialism versus communism, and
Right.
we have a whole party in the United States that has bet on the wrong model.
Right.
That's pretty scary, really.
You mentioned Canada briefly, and we have the USMCA that's being looked at, being hope
Yes,
maybe
we got to get it done.
finalized.
We got to
Yeah.
get it done.
So will that help Canada and Mexico?
Yeah, I think the first NAFTA was very positive thing. I disagree with Trump on that. I mean, remember, he used to call it the worst trade deal in history.
Yeah.
You know, look, there were some problems with it for sure.
Yeah.
But you know, from the time that was back in '93, I worked on NAFTA. Remember, that was Reagan's vision. You know, that we'd make North America a free trade continent. I love that vision. We want to make sure there are no abuses taking place.
Right.
And I think Trump has made some improvements to it. Nancy Pelosi, just bring the thing to a vote. That's all we need. Bring this to a vote. All these Democrats are complaining about Trump, all these, you know, the trade protectionist policies are hurting the economy. Okay, you're for free trade. Bring up USMCA. Let us have just an up or down vote. By the way, if she allows that, it will pass. And that would be very positive for the economy.
You think it's possible that she just doesn't want to give the president a win?
Gee, that's a tough question. Of course she doesn't want to, you know, of course.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, she's part of her, look, we don't have to like speculate here. She says, I'm the president of the resistance movement. That means anything Trump wants to do, they're just against it, whether it's good for the economy or not. My goodness, we passed the biggest tax cut for American families and American businesses in the history of this country, and every single Democrat in the House and Senate voted against it. And here we are 2 years later with the fruits of that tax cut, which are evident to everyone. And the first thing they say if they take power is we're going to get rid of the tax cut.
Doesn't sound like it makes a ton of sense when you put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, you know, and they are so beholden to this kind of class warfare idea. You know, in my opinion is, you know, of course we want the poor to do better. You know, by the way, the wage data from the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago, the biggest wage gains under Trump have been for the lowest income workers. How cool is that? You know, so we're actually lifting.
Extremely cool, I
yeah,
would say.
right? I mean, this is what we wanted. We wanted to lift the lower income and high. You know, Trump would always say, look, the rich can take care of themselves. I mean, he likes rich people. He's rich himself. But he wanted, the whole idea was, how do we pull up those people at the bottom ladder? That's happening. But the left feels like the way you do that is like just take money from rich people and giving it to poor people. That doesn't work. You know, you got to create a healthy economy so everybody has an opportunity to succeed, and that's what's happening under Trump.
So what do you think, given, you know, these different variables, what do you think the outlook is for 2020 for the president?
I mean, if the economy remains this strong, I mean, he'll win about a 40-state, you know, landslide re-election. I mean, people don't vote against prosperity. I mean, you know, they could run Mother Teresa against Trump, and if we got a strong economy, Trump is going to win. You know, people in presidential elections, which are very different elections than midterm elections.
Right.
Midterms, people vote on things like education, healthcare, you know, the feel-good issues, the environment. What do people, when they choose a president, they look, in my opinion, two things. How will they affect my pocketbook and my financial security, and will they keep our nation safe? Now, let's face it, on both those issues, Trump trumps any Democrat that I can possibly think of.
Steve Moore, wonderful to have you.
Thank you for having me, and I love Epic Times.
Thank you.